Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Arn. And of course, we couldn't do it without the founder of the Four Horsemen, the Hall of Famer himself, AA Arn Anderson. Arn, how are you, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Man, better than I deserve. Excited to be with you. I've enjoyed us marching through 2010. Bragging Rights 2010 is our show today. And of course, next week we're doing another hashtag Ask Arn Anything. Arn, I'm pretty fired up about this one, man. This is, I have to admit, I wasn't at my peak fandom in 2010, but there's a lot of interesting stuff, especially with the benefit of hindsight going on. This show went down on October 24th. It's at the Target Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. You got any good Minnesota wrestling stories? I know a lot of, your brethren came from that area. And I guess in kayfabe, maybe once upon a time you did too, but chat me up. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Is it a wrestling town or not so much?
Well, number one, I am from southern Minnesota.
Rome, Minnesota, to be exact.
That's correct. I tell you what, we used to, there was one time in a snowstorm, we ran Minneapolis and we were stuck staying over there. I forget, I think we were going to probably go to Green Bay the next day, but there was a gym, which is world famous, where all those guys from Minnesota worked out. You've heard the stories about that place, right? The gym.
Yep.
It's where the Zubaz were based. The guys that owned, Zubaz, and Road Warriors bought into it and were the face of Zubaz, and Barry Darsow, Rude, Kurt Hennig. The countless number of guys, plus Eddie Sharkey trained all those guys. There was just a lot of things centered around Minneapolis. It was a hotbed for talent. I mean, everybody trained at that one gym, the gym, and man, everybody was jacked. It was just almost like a breeding ground for talent in those days. And but I tell you what, the weather can turn on a dime, and it did. We went from it just being like a high of 50 and clear to overnight there was a foot of snow on the ground, and we ended up having to do some pretty serious drinking. And for some reason we decided to all just meet at the gym. I don't know why. So we just sat in there, and there's a picture I've got somewhere of it put up that's pretty classic, of all the guys from Midnight Express were there, and there was probably 10 of us. Road Warriors were there, a bunch of those guys, T.J. Khan. And man, we just sat at the gym and drank till about 4 a.m. It was a great time.
Oh, the good old days. This is the second year for Bragging Rights. It's going to get 137,000 buys. It's down from 181,000 the prior year. Attendance that night is reported to be about 9,000, and the Target Center holds like almost 20,000 at full attendance. So less than half the arena is filled. Do you think this is a case of Minnesota being a soft market? The business is cyclical, or as you like to say, Fans just didn't want to see it that night.
Well, I think it's another case of throwing a bunch of just gimmick pay-per-views at them once a month, twice a month, and it's just overkill. It's just too much for people. And those days they're paying full price, right?
Right.
To ask a guy twice, and I don't know if you had two in a month, during this particular month. I didn't research it, but
yeah, they're 3 weeks apart.
Conrad, for your average person, and I get it, to pay that twice a month, plus your cable bill and all your other bills is pretty stout order to ask from people. And I just think they pick and choose the ones that have the most luster on them. And bragging rights was basically the theme of it. But if you really break it down, what monetary value is there in bragging rights for anything? Hey, I'm a better fisherman than you. Okay. What's that pay? Hey, I could throw a better curveball than you can. In this particular case, that's all it was about, Raw or SmackDown, and it was, bragging rights based on one match and the winner of that match. It wasn't even a situation, I think, previously, the year before, it was the sum of the matches and whoever won the lion's share of the matches had the bragging rights. Am I off on that?
No, I don't think so. And maybe you can poke some holes in this. Meltzer says the only reason this pay-per-view even exists, bragging rights, the reason it's brought back, is to help promote the video game, which at the time was SmackDown versus Raw. And I guess that makes sense. I mean, the sponsor of this show is that video game. And they're even going to do like a mashup of the Raw and SmackDown sets where the ropes are half red, half blue. This has got to be a first where the company is really sort of saying, hey, we're going to build a pay-per-view around a video game.
Well, and if that's the case, I'm sure that it was financially a success, huge success. If you're combining all those factors into the goal of the pay-per-view, then it was successful, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's one hand washes the other, I guess. Let's talk about what's going on behind the scenes in the world of wrestling before we get to the show itself. The WWE Network, according to the Observer, was targeted for a 2011 release, but it was delayed with a new target set for January of 2012. Of course, we know it wound up actually debuting and launching on February 24th, 2014. It's pretty remarkable to think that Vince wanted to launch that 3 years prior to when he actually did. He certainly would have been way ahead of the curve there. What were you hearing about what the network could be or might be here in 2010?
Well, when you have your own network and you're pushing only your product, I mean, my mind was kind of redlining. It's like, my God, the potential there, the amount of content, the going back to the trivia, I was picturing wrestling from the 60s and 70s and basically everything that had ever been taped by a handheld video camera or a Kodak camera having snapshots. I was just looking at that being unbelievable potential and the amount of just sheer volume that could be put on there. And once you own your own network, for some reason in my mind, I was picturing it like us having a CBS or ABC or NBC at our disposal. Wasn't quite that, but network with purely wrestling and wrestling content, it turned out to be exactly what I thought it would be. It's a plethora of anything from any generation, basically, that you want to see. And to this day, for the life of me, for $9.99, I can't figure out why everybody that has a TV doesn't have it.
Yeah. Especially if you're even a casual wrestling fan, it is a big value. Let's talk about something else that has gotten a little bit of press 10 years ago. Kevin Nash does an interview and perhaps he's referencing the Nexus angle, but he says something along the lines of, it takes 7 years before you can get over and draw money. And Meltzer even reports that he called the WWE youth movement what they're doing here with the Nexus and pushing the young guys. Kevin Nash says that's a mistake. Chris Jericho does another interview and totally disagrees with what Kevin Nash said and says, no, it only takes 6 or 7 months to get over, maybe. and even blast Kevin Nash for being short-sighted. It's funny that this comes up now because I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with Eric Bischoff, maybe a little longer than that, about, how long it takes to get over. And he thought it took 8 years. You got to be on TV. You got to be established. You got to be on top for 8 years. And then you can really draw money. And of course you have to then dig in and say, well, how do you define drawing money? And we cited some different exceptions. Of course there are exceptions. Roman Reigns perhaps is an exception. John Cena perhaps is an exception. Of course, The Rock and Goldberg are exceptions, but I'm curious your take. Do you think there is sort of a general rule of thumb for how long an audience has to be acquainted with you and familiar with you before you're, over and drawing money, quote unquote?
Well, this is what I always tell people, and this was my experience of the time that I was coming up in the business from 82 on. In those days, I feel like it took you about 5 years. And that's 300 plus days a year now, mind you, to learn the business I'm talking about from coming out of nowhere, no knowledge, anything, no training, none of the above, not being second generation or third generation wrestler, none of those things figured in. For a layperson walking in off the street, I felt like it was about, 1,500 matches. And that was with a lot of variables go into that. When did you first start getting to do promos? How were you used in those first 5 years? Did you start off your first territory or your second territory or your third territory working underneath? Where were you positioned, after that inaugural, because back then there weren't necessarily wrestling schools. You might have got trained by an individual guy that had access to a ring. Maybe like myself, you had about 8 workouts, maybe 10 at the most, and you were thrown out there into the lion's den, and you learned on the job. How much opportunity did you have to do promos, local promos? Like I said, were you used in territories to where, the one thing about Bill Watts' territory, and everyone that worked there will tell you, first match, 15 to 20 minutes, no punching or kicking. That was the rule, period. Well, in 6 months, you could learn how to wrestle because you had to. You didn't have the option of brawling. It was not an option. A lot of nights you would go 20-minute Broadways, which is going through the time limit, time limit draw. What a learning experience that was. And for being my first territory, man, it couldn't have came at a bigger time. And then you go to a place like Tennessee and you learn showbiz. And we used to call it Tennessee high spots. Some people use it as a negative. I always looked at it as being a positive because it was so entertaining and it was different from anything I'd seen. I did not work there. I just saw some of the guys that had been there and their style of work, and it was different, had a different layer to it. But I would say if you got elevated after your second territory, kind of, and then you were able to go for a year in a territory where you're working with top guys, the key to this whole thing, the key to our business, it's a real simple rule. Working with somebody better than you every night. That's how you get better. If you work with somebody at the same skill level or below, you're not going to get better. You've got to be in there with somebody better than you. So that was kind of the criteria that I looked at. And again, you got to look at the time frame. If you're going to draw money, there's a big difference in working for a territory that don't have the access or the opportunity or the capability of doing WWE-esque vignettes on you. I mean, when it used to be, if you had your top skill level down and you were ready to be that in that top spot, for them to bring you in and do 6 or 8 weeks of vignettes on you, you were a star walking in the door. As soon as you parted the curtain, they knew who you were. They knew if they liked you or not already, and they had an impression on you. The smaller companies that didn't have those capabilities to do those world class vignettes, like a Pensacola territory or no budget, then it was, you had less star power, less tools to help you get over. So everything is variable, I think, depending on which territory and exactly what year we're talking about. But I would say 5 years, and if you have all the trappings and all the vehicles, they made me an Anderson when I walked in the door, and for Jim Crockett Promotions, they didn't have a bunch of vignettes on me. But when I walked in and they said, "This is an Anderson," it was an immediate launching pad and advantage that I had over a lot of people just walking in the door. So,
well,
long answer, I know.
No. We like that. That's what we're here for. Let's talk about your old pal, Matt Hardy. On October 14th, Matt Hardy is granted his release after trying for a release for some time. He said in an interview that it was harder to get his release than it was to get hired. And, Hardy said he could finally reinvent himself. And of course, we know eventually a few years later, he would do that with the broken Matt Hardy character. It does feel like over time, for whatever reason, the WWE has not really known what to do with Matt Hardy. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think Matt Hardy will ever be a quote heel, because my God, they were babies probably when they first did their first television, for WWF at the time. They started so young, and the audience actually grew up with the Hardys. They saw the evolution of the Hardys. They were there from the very beginning. And when you spend that much time with a couple of guys who are, they're endearing. They have that endearing quality. Jeff Hardy is, he was a high flyer before high flying was fashionable. He did all the crazy stuff way back when, which separated him out. Matt was a part of that as well. But I just think that when you grow up with somebody, you get comfortable with them. You know how they are. And, being from North Carolina, they're Southern boys, which means they're gentlemen. They just have that easy, cool, easy swagger about them. And I think by growing up with the audience is just used to them, and that's who they are to the audience.
Let's talk about Freddie Prinze Jr. He's rehired by the WWE in this era as a producer and director. He had a brief run as part of the writing team the prior year back in 2009. And Meltzer would say, the story we got is that Prinze Jr. got back in touch with the company in August and said he was interested in working there again, but he didn't want to travel to Stamford. So he's going to be at a lot of the TV shoots. He's going to be involved with the backstage pre-tapes, on-site vignettes, and will be involved in a lot of the creative meetings, but via conference call from LA. He'll fly in for a lot of the television shoots, but not all of them. He was generally well liked by everyone in creative when he was there. This is an interesting story because I think a lot of people know Freddie Prinze Jr. from his work on the screen, not necessarily behind the scenes. But once fans heard he was involved, they wondered, what was it like to work with Freddie Prinze Jr.? Did you have any experience with him? Remember any particular angles or stories or stuff y'all worked on together?
Yeah, I liked Freddie. Liked him a lot. My wife could tell you, all the movies that he was in, and she liked his acting ability, and she thought he was cute. And it was one of our favorites. Keeping in mind, her age at the time, significantly younger than me by about 9 years. But Freddie was a guy. The one thing that I've always respected, Conrad, it's people that come into our business from other places, Hollywood and all that. First of all, I get a finger on the pulse of, do they respect the business? Do they know anything about our business? Do they have any qualifications? What would lead them to believe they can walk into our industry, which is totally different from any other form of entertainment, and make a contribution? And once you assess them, or once I do, then I have an opinion about them one way or the other. Plus, I want to give them a chance and treat them the way I want to be treated if I walked into their environment. Try to make them comfortable. And Freddie had a good working knowledge and was a big fan, but a very knowledgeable fan about what we do. And that grabbed me right away. And, the guy wanted to dig his heels in and contribute. And he was good helping the kids on promo class. A lot of things, backstage pre-tapes. He lended a lot of expertise too, because cameras were the way he made his living. And I thought he made a good contribution to the company.
Well, that's great to hear. It feels like he was well liked, and that's certainly a report that we got from Meltzer too. Chris Benoit's dad is going to take a shot at Linda. Meltzer would write, when he was in Hartford, Michael Benoit claimed Linda McMahon was running only to protect the WWE and said he believes the way the McMahon handled the death of his son and his family and their approach to the health of their performers should disqualify her from being in Congress. Quote, I'm almost thankful this lady is running for the Senate of the United States. Why? Because it's put her company right in the spotlight and given me an opportunity to talk about what I believe is the underlying reasons for all the deaths in the industry. This is something that we don't talk a lot about, but Chris's dad, Michael, what do you think about these comments and sort of pointing the finger at WWE for all this?
And I'm going to disappoint you on this, and I apologize. The whole Chris thing, I have yet to wrap my head around.
Sure.
The guy I knew wasn't capable of doing this. A lot of the unknowns we'll never know. I know the tragedy of the result, which is unforgivable. But I just, to be honest with you, I've not had any resolution about it in my mind. I can't wrap my head around it, like I said, so I don't feel comfortable discussing Mr. Benoit and his slant. I'm sure, he has something that he'll never be able to get rid of and never be able to shake it. And my heart goes out to him. I just really can't comment on that and say anything that would be for sure and intelligent.
Yeah, listen, it was something that shocked the world, not just the wrestling world, but everybody, because you just don't expect to hear a story like that. And I think everybody's sort of scratching their heads on the other side, wanting to know, hey, why? And is there something we could have done? And how could we have helped? And how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And is this a teachable moment? And I think there were more questions maybe than answers, at least short term. And I think, one of the results of the whole Benoit tragedy, and I hate to bring it back to wrestling, but that's one of the reasons that people started to really sit up and pay attention to head trauma and the way it's treated in wrestling, right?
It certainly helped put a spotlight on it. Yeah, it sure did. And I would just say this about Chris, ask any wrestler that's spent any time in the locker room with him, any time on the road with him, any time in the ring with him, nobody saw this coming.
Right.
That's what makes it so scary. There were no warning signs that any of us saw. The last time I saw him, he was as kind and as professional as he was the first time I saw him. So to say there were warning signs that were ignored, now I'm talking about in our world. I'm not talking about when he went home or anything like that in the confines of his home and his family life. We don't know about, but the times I saw him, there was no indicators, which makes it so scary.
It's, unbelievable. We'll talk about it another time. Let's get back on track here. The night before Bragging Rights, there's a much talked about sport happening. Of course, it's UFC 121. The reason it's of particular interest here is we've got Cain Velasquez defeating Brock Lesnar by TKO in 4 minutes and 12 seconds of the very first round to win the heavyweight title. The event does over 1 million buys. The next night, of course, Bragging Rights does 137,000 buys. At Crown Jewel, we get a rematch, if you will, and this time it's in the WWE. Last year, 2019, Lesnar would beat Kane. It took 1 minute and 28 seconds. It was appointment television for wrestling fans, and I'm sure a lot of the folks within the industry, whenever Brock Lesnar stepped inside the octagon. Were you shocked to see Kane make such short work of Brock?
No, when you got heavy hitters like that and you got heavy hands like those guys do, those heavyweights, man, they will knock your head completely off. Well, the lightweights will too, but the heavyweights, man, are just, you don't see a lot of 5 round fights with two top heavyweights. I mean, you just don't. It could go in 30 seconds. It could go 5 rounds, and they beat themselves into a coma just about. I've seen both ways. So we knew that Brock was going to go for the kill just by his nature, and Cain Velasquez, he was a really skilled guy. That's what he had trained for. He wasn't a professional wrestler or anything else. He's a professional fighter.
Right.
So we knew that one had the potential to have a quick finish and fireworks, and it did.
Let's talk about Kane for a minute. He popped up and did a big match in Mexico wearing a mask, and I think he even pulled off a little aerial maneuver, and he had a lot of eyes on him. And I think there may have even been some preliminary interest from Cody and the gang and saying, hey man, this might be a guy. Again, I didn't talk to anybody about that. I'm just saying there was a lot of buzz around him. He winds up signing with WWE. He's on that first big Smackdown once they're on network TV. And well, it wasn't long for that world. Would you be surprised if you saw Kane take a stab at wrestling somewhere else now that he's no longer with WWE, or do you think he got it out of his system?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but I think he has so much raw athletic ability, and he has such a look. I mean, he scares me just looking at him on TV. He's got that eye of the tiger gimmick. I think if he truly has always been a closet fan and loved wrestling, like as a kid, like most of us, and grown up, but he just took a different path as far as the UFC and the MMA stuff. If it's still kind of stirring in his belly, when things heat back up, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get re-signed with WWE, because I don't think they've got their full benefit out of him. And I don't think, he's had a chance to, with enough training and some more training and some on the job training with some skilled talent that, we've seen the last or the best of him.
I hope not. I had a chance to meet him several years ago. Nice guy. Couldn't be nicer. He seems like a big wrestling fan too. And anytime you can bring an outsider in who has a passion for it, and they're not just there, quote unquote, for the payday, but they really love it. Like we saw what Ronda Rousey did. And I mean, those guys can be real needle movers for you to a new fan base. Of course, loyal fan base is going to be there as long as they can. I shouldn't say they'll always be there, because we've seen some of that erode over time. But when you can get sort of the casual guy who maybe used to watch wrestling and doesn't anymore, I think they call him the lapsed fan. Shout out to JP and them. Either way though, I do think that there is more meat on the bone for Kane, or I hope so.
Well, let me just say this about a lot of those guys that I've met. And let me tell you, when I found out Ronda Rousey and her crew were using the horsewomen thing, for her to know who I was.
Right.
Ronda Rousey was the biggest star in MMA for a time, male or female. And I'm a huge fan of MMA. And for that, you're talking about being flattered and things throughout history that have been cool and people we've got to meet and all that. Meeting Ronda under the circumstances of the respect level she has for what we do, and wanting to associate herself with the Horsemen, I was hugely flattered. And her husband turned out to be such a gentleman and a hell of a fighter too. And it's Daniel Cormier, who I've talked to a couple times backstage in LA. It's like across the board, they're such quality people. It's just, to get to meet them and find out that not only will they rip your head off, as soon as the fight starts backstage. They're really quality human beings, and that makes it even better. So, I'm a fan of their sport across the board.
It's going to be fun to see what happens next with Kane. And for that matter, if Ronda ever comes back, and you got to think at some point the timing will line up. Let's get to the event itself. Bragging Rights 2010. We're going to get things started with a dark match. We've got MVP winning over Chavo Guerrero. And then on the opening match of the show, it's Daniel Bryan and Dolph Ziggler. It's a non-title match. It's SmackDown versus Raw. Meltzer dug it. He gave it 3.5 stars. Fans were chanting Bryan from very early in the match, and the crowd was super hot for this. Michael Cole is on commentary trying to push Bryan with the nickname Mr. Bland. I don't know if that's exactly how you help get a guy over. They're doing lots of early mat work, which I'm sure you were a big fan of. Ziggler, of course, is a legitimate amateur badass doing a bunch of amateur takedowns. And this was good stuff. I like the way it started. Matt Stryker's on commentary. Jerry Lawler's on commentary. What'd you think of this one? I thought this was a really, really great match.
Well, I think calling him Mr. Bland is Mr. Bullshit.
Yeah.
You know what I think. And again, it's one of those deals. Use him because the audience, he's catching fire, and anybody with two eyes can see it. The audience likes Daniel. He's every man. He's the overachiever. He's a guy that's out there with skills, but maybe he doesn't have, the size and the power of a lot of guys. But he's very skilled, and he's done his homework, and he's got guts for days. All those things. But it's one of those deals. It's another one of those that, let's let him go out and get over to a degree, but let's just don't turn the water spigot wide open, because that alone, calling him Mr. Bland.
Yeah.
I just ask one thing, Conrad, because I don't want to get off on a negative tangent about any company or anything. Let me just ask you this. If this is a performer on our show and he's a moneymaker going to be for us and he's going to be a featured part of our talent, why would you ever speak about him negatively or talk down about him or do anything other than enhance, what's going to become a big part of our company? That never made sense to me for our announcers to just knock in that kind of way, our talent. I just will never get it. I've never got it. It just is a mistake. And you've seen it. It's like they want you to get over, but they don't want you to get too over. And it's all because they don't want you to have any power so that you can control your destiny. They want blind obedience. It goes back to that same common thread. But let me tell you, the match with him and Dolph Ziggler, 4 stars at least.
Yeah.
And 2 guys that understand the business, 2 guys understand, putting the wrestling into the match, which a lot of matches you'll see in their entirety doesn't have anything to do with wrestling. It's high spot central. This one would have been a crash course in how to work, I would imagine. And it just benefited both guys. It's a great way to start a pay-per-view off because at the end of it, you've got a good taste in the audience's mouth, and it's only going to go up from there. But you really set the mood and set the precedent.
I agree. I think you could enjoy this one more with the commentary off. And we should mention that Mr. Bland thing wouldn't have been something that Michael Cole did on his own. We know that comes from up top. And there's something else in here that, boy, it just does not age well. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. Lawler and Stryker, and I'm sure this is a directive because they wouldn't have done it otherwise. In real life, 2 great guys. But man, they're just piling on Vicky here, saying that a truck hit her because it was too far to drive around her, and noting that her arms jiggle when she claps. Just lots of, I don't know, shitty fat jokes. And they did this a few times to women there where it just feels like we're just being mean on commentary. Isn't that weird? Like, why is that necessary? Do you think?
Well, it's not necessary. We as a society have determined it's not necessary, nor is it acceptable. You know, I think we have, as a nation at least, have grown up, you know, at least to acknowledge the fact that, you shouldn't say fat or skinny or ugly or any of those things that are derogatory towards, a person. Why? I mean, where's your benefit? Where's that going to draw you any money? Where does that get you? It just feels like it's just shaming. And back in those days, there wasn't as much, brought to the forefront as there is in our society now. Could have never happened with social media because they would have jumped all over it, but you didn't have social media to the degree you have now. So, you know, again, I tell you the rules that I grew up with in the business, and here's the way it is. You don't say fat, you don't say too small, you don't say too old, because guess what? Down the road somewhere, that guy may be your opponent, and guess what? You got beat by a fat old guy. What does that make you look like?
Right.
So it's just common sense back in the day.
Well, it's just weird that, I don't know, so much about this is weird. Calling Daniel Mr. Bland when he's so over here. I mean, he's super over. It is a little weird not hearing all the yes chants, but that would come years later. So it's just a reminder that, man, this guy's over with this audience. Next up, we get a backstage skit with the Raw team. Santino gets the biggest reaction. He's playing up this comedy angle really hard. There's major friction between the Raw brand stars. Cohesion seems to be likely to play a little role in the events to come. Dashing Cody Rhodes is out, teaming with Drew McIntyre. Both look so young here. Cody still has no knee pads. I got a question though. This is a little weird, and you lived it. I can't ask this to any of my other co-hosts. When should a wrestler not wear knee pads? It seems like to me, you'd want to wear knee pads all the time.
The only two times he doesn't have to have knee pads on would probably be showering or shitting.
I agree.
Any other time that he's in a work environment, he needs to have on knee pads. All it takes is one time taking a bump to the floor. If there's concrete, and you don't have it padded properly, or even if it is padded, you got to understand around the ringside is concrete with just a thin pad on it. You land on your knee out there, you're going to blow your knee out. You hit one of those posts or you hit those stairs, you're going to, tear your knee up. It's
right.
Just one of those things that I would say 99% of wrestlers throughout history, or at least through my era, had some form of knee protection on. 1% didn't. The Ronnie Garvins of the world, the guys, apparently Cody wanted to give it a try, but I think if you really truly ask him, that was his way of idolizing a particular wrestler somewhere, somehow, or that he felt like it gave him a better sense of being durable or maybe more mature. I don't know, but it's just foolish to not wear knee pads. He wears them now, I can tell you that.
The anonymous Raw GM makes an impromptu match. It's going to be John Cena and David Otunga, and they're going to win the tag titles from Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre in 6 minutes and 27 seconds. Meltzer would recap it like this. It started with Rhodes and McIntyre coming out and McIntyre saying, "All the boys in the back are scared of us." And then the computer says there's a team that wants to face them. Wade Barrett comes out and says Cena and Otunga would challenge them for the title. Cena works almost the entire match. Otunga keeps wanting to tag in. Cena's ignoring him. For the finish, Cena would block Crossroads by Cody and then put the STF on him in the middle and get the tap. Meltzer would say, for some reason, McIntyre didn't even try to make a save. Otunga then does this big celebration like he had won something, which was funny. They noted he became a tag champion because of his partner, and they joked how Otunga is known for mooching off of his partner. Of course, that's an inside reference to him being Jennifer Hudson's fiance. Cena then said or Cena then gives Otunga the attitude adjustment, holds up both belts by himself. What'd you think of this? I mean, it's an interesting twist. I guess we should remind everybody, because of the prior pay-per-view, which we just covered in our archives, Cena's now a member of Nexus, but a reluctant member, wants to do it all on his own, wants no help from any of these guys. But now he finds himself as tag champs, and he did it by himself.
Well, I mean, that was one of the money angles of that period. Cena's involvement with the Nexus. Their numbers were so overwhelming. These guys looked incredible together, and every one of them was in shape. They looked unbelievable, and together with Wade doing the talking, they were a formidable force to take over the entire company, much less just ruining John Cena's life. So this was one of those exceptions that you were able to get away with something for Cena, I think, without, just having him destroy all those guys.
Right.
So, I wasn't against that for that particular night, just the way it was laid out. And John was your lead babyface, so they were building him into being your lead babyface. So, in a 2-on-2 situation like that, or even a 2-on-1, because Cody and Drew were very young in the business, they were still rookies. Cena should have prevailed over those two, and he did. And for their story going forward with the Nexus, I think it was okay, and it probably fit for that point in time.
Yeah, I actually like the story. It is a little fun to see, Cody and Drew. Of course, we know they're going to go on to be tippy top guys in the WWE and AEW, both on top of the mountain on either show. And that was not the case necessarily here. So it's kind of fun to see. Of course, Cena, it feels like maybe most of his wrestling days were in the rearview mirror. But David Otunga, this is a guy who had a legitimate backstory that people could gravitate to. It feels like he was 1 degree separated from a mainstream star. He had an incredible look. Why don't you think he did more with WWE? I mean, he did fine on commentary, but it feels like he could have been somebody with a lot more momentum than what we actually saw. Why don't you think it clicked better?
I know that he would be here today and gone tomorrow, and whatever that reason was, I think he was probably left unbooked for a lot of that time, but I don't think he got enough reps to actually see what he was capable of. And now he looked as good as anybody.
Right.
And a handsome guy and a pleasant guy, had a lot of, class about himself. I think the original, if my opinion matters, I never heard this said in closed doors, but I think in the back of Vince's mind that Jennifer Hudson was going to sing the national anthem at WrestleMania at some point.
Right.
And that, no disrespect to David, but that was the goal, and to keep David happy during that period, because you're talking about a coup for WrestleMania. How big would that have been?
Right.
I'm sure if that was ever presented to her people, they said something along the lines of, Jennifer, you're a worldwide, pop star or whatever she would be considered. You're as hot as anybody on earth. You don't need to be involved with wrestling. I get that your husband is trying his hand at that. You're somewhere else in some other stratosphere. The office never got the memo, though, I don't think. So, our office. I think that was the goal anyway.
Let's talk about another big star, literally the Big Show. We get a movie preview for his new movie, Knucklehead, which the promo says will be out in theaters. Slant Magazine gave the film 0.5 star out of a possible 5 stars. And they wrote the movie's title as, quote, a description for both the film and anyone who chooses to be its audience. I think according to, boxofficemojo.com, it did open in some theaters and it drew $7,927 worldwide. Of course, that would not include television licensing, direct to video sales, or anything like that. But the movie Knucklehead doesn't seem like a lot of people saw it. Did you see it?
I did not, and I love Big Show, but not much of a movie guy. It better be something, and this has been that way for me my entire life. It better be something that grabs me. Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Top Gun, some of those type movies. I did not see Show's movie. Like I said, we're working all the time, but he did. Let me just clarify this. He did get paid, right?
Oh yeah.
And Show was happy. I know him that well.
Next up, we've got Ted DiBiase. No, not that one. His son beating Goldust in 7 minutes and 27 seconds. Goldust comes out with the $1 million belt. This is not announced as a title match. And unlike when his father held the same title and it was defended like a championship, this is just something you steal back and forth. This is all according to Dave Meltzer. The wrestling here was good, but the match had no heat. Maurice attacked Oksana to try to steal the belt back. It sort of is what it is. Goldust has fallen for Oksana and she's distracted. DiBiase's going to hit the DDT and pin him. After the match, Maurice is now holding the belt. Oksana attacks her, takes the belt. DiBiase then corners Oksana and she starts coming on to DiBiase, who seems to like it. That allows Goldust to sneak up from behind, deliver the final cut, and Goldust and Oksana leave together with the belt. And Meltzer does note that throughout commentary, Michael Cole was defending Goldust in commentary. So maybe Michael Cole is turning heel or Goldust is turning babyface. Either way, this is kind of fun because we know, 20 years prior to this, we saw Dusty and Dustin in the WWF against Ted DiBiase and Virgil. 20 years later, guess what? Goldust is now wrestling Ted's son. So Dusty's son is wrestling Ted's son. This is kind of fun. I was a big Ted DiBiase fan. I wish he would have stuck around longer. I can't help but think what he would be able to do in wrestling today. It does feel like there's more opportunity maybe than there was when he was in the game. You saw this one for the first time in 10 years. What'd you think about Ted DiBiase and Goldust here?
Well, I'm a fan of Goldust. I had some of his very first matches, probably his first big angle, where I turned on him. And, when I was with Parker and that crew, Colonel Parker and his guys, Bunkhouse Bunk and all them. So I knew that Teddy, had a lot of potential and Goldust was in a position to guide him. Really what this was a fluff ball of just, remember the old kids game, keep away?
Yep.
That's what that was, using the $1 million belt as the prize. It wasn't meant to be serious or draw any money. It wasn't allotted enough time. It was just enough entertainment for a spot on the show. Certainly Goldust, always deserved to be on pay-per-views. He was just a tremendous talent, no matter who you put him with. And over the years, his careers kind of went up and down with a number of variables involved. But the one thing that you could always count on, he is a top shelf performer. And when you write his name down, he comes to play. And Teddy probably got out, too soon. Can go all the way back to, I felt like when he was with Randy and Cody, those guys looked as good as any three guys on the card coming through the curtain. And they were really learning, from Randy and from each other. And they were a cohesive team. That they got broke up too soon. And then Cody and Teddy got broke up too soon. And it was never the same after that.
I think this is one of the first times I noticed that Goldust appears to have a trap door on the ass of his suit. I can only assume that trap door is there to make some gold mud. Hypothetically,
do you assume that, do you?
Well, I'm just saying, I don't remember seeing a lot of trap doors in wrestling outfits, but I mean, I guess if you're going to be in that get up, it's probably going to be something that needs to be addressed at some point.
Let's just say you had the wrong combination of Mexican food.
Sure.
and it don't agree with you, and you got that rubber suit pulled up and zipped up, and it hits you all of a sudden, you go hauling ass down the hall and hit the shitter, you probably ain't got time to wiggle out of that rubber suit all the way from being zipped up. You probably got to hit that trap door to make it happen without something really bad resulting. So you're probably exactly right.
Next up, we've got Layla, the co-champion with McCool. She's going to retain the Divas title, pinning Natalya in 4 minutes, 48 seconds. First, Layla and Michelle McCool are going to cut a promo on people from Minnesota. They're going to talk about how fat the women are there. They're both going to make a joke about deleting text messages from Brett Favre, which gets the biggest reaction of the segment. Matt Stryker would even comment this was Shockmaster bad. I don't know about that. It gets a 1/4 of a star. Natalya does a delayed vertical suplex while doing quarter squats, which was different, according to Meltzer. McCool tried to interfere, but Natalya threw her into the barricade, but the match looked bad from there. At one point, Layla grabbed the belt and wanted to leave. Natalya ran outside and attacked her and throws her back in the ring. Michelle McCool then kicks Natalya in the head and Layla pins her. And that's the story. 1/4 star. I don't know. This one just didn't click, but I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it Shockmaster bad. What say you?
Well, when you got Natty, in the match, I don't think she's ever been involved in a 1/4 star match.
No.
And Layla was just learning. She was still pretty green. Now, Mrs. Undertaker had some skills and some aptitude and was an athlete. So whatever her part was, even if it was just the kick in the head, I'm sure was convincing, and it was what it was. Let's face it, the whole concept is bogus. 2 people sharing one title.
Right.
We're always trying to give credibility to our business, and then you turn around and shoot yourself in the foot like something like that. There's no such thing as 2 people sharing a championship. So begin there and then ask yourself why you think it probably wasn't as good as it should have been.
Next up, we've got Josh Matthews hyping up the Buried Alive match from inside the grave, and it appears that his head is above the grave. So of course that means there's no way it's actually 6 feet deep. As a background, at Hell in a Cell, Paul Bearer, who was with The Undertaker, turned on him, and that gave the victory to Cain. 2 weeks later on SmackDown, Bearer issues one more challenge to The Undertaker, this time in a Buried Alive match. And Kane's going to beat Undertaker in 16 minutes and 53 seconds to retain the world title. This is the 5th Buried Alive match ever. It's the first time a singles title had ever been on the line in one of these. In the prior Buried Alive match between The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon, Kane buried The Undertaker, and that built to the return of the dead man in their WrestleMania 20 match. Undertaker at this point has lost twice in a row on pay-per-view against Kane. And unlike last time, the champion Kane comes out last. Lots of little nuanced things here. And I think this is actually their last singles match that we would see on TV. They may have done some stuff on house shows and things like that. What do you think of the match? It only gets 1 star in the Observer. I'm sure that, the crowd chanting "We want blood" probably wasn't exactly something the office wanted to hear. This is as gimmick gets, a Buried Alive match. You saw it for the first time in 10 years. What'd you think?
Well, you brought star power into it, but I think that's probably, for me, the end of it. I just have never liked brother against brother.
Right.
Even if the 2 brothers are monsters. I didn't like the Hardys fighting each other. I didn't like the Steiners fighting each other. I don't like Kane and Undertaker fighting each other. And again, in every contest, you have to have someone you're pulling for, someone you're pulling against. I think at this point, both of them had become iconic already. And it's 2 monsters slugging it out. You don't really have a weaker one of the 2, so it's hard to get any sympathy on anybody. Nobody's really, if you really look at it and think about it, you never think either one is in peril or danger. or, in a position where they may get hurt or get beat or whatever the situation is. It's hard to feel and get in somebody's corner when you got two monsters in there slugging it out. You just kind of watch the massacre, and that's kind of the way the audience felt about it, I think. And it's, you know, it just is not my cup of tea.
Well, we at least got over Nexus. This is sort of the same formula as every casket match Undertaker ever had. It looks like Undertaker's going to win, and that happens when he chokes out Kane with the go-go plata. Of course, Kane's trying to tap out, but there's no submissions here. So instead he just passes out and Undertaker slings him over in the grave. But then he spots Paul Bearer, thinks this is a chance for some revenge. He throws him into the dirt. He's about to choke slam him when all of a sudden Nexus comes out and attacks him, and they become too much for him. I kind of like that. We're showing that Nexus is now going after the top guys, whether it's John Cena or it's the Undertaker. Kind of a fun deal here. Kane uses his magical powers to blow fire out from behind the headstone and make the front end loader dump dirt onto Undertaker. And of course the announcers are pivoting from saying it's 1,000 pounds of dirt to it's 2,000 pounds of dirt to it's 3,000 pounds of dirt. It is what it is.
That was actually said on commentary.
Yeah. At different points, they're reference. That's 1,000 pounds. That's 2,000. My goodness. That's 3,000. Yeah. Now in actuality, we're nerds here. So we did enough research. I think it's probably 2,000 to 3,000. I mean, that's probably accurate, but either way, it's a gargantuan amount of dirt and it's a gargantuan mess, but I did like the Nexus piece.
I may have the answer. The 1,000 pounds of dirt had babies.
It was that rabbit dirt.
Triplets, quadruplets. Yeah. I don't mind putting any heat on the Nexus. I don't mind that part because it shows they're getting ballsy and they're going after the top dog. My question would probably be, if you're going to go there, wouldn't Undertaker at some point come back for revenge?
Yeah.
Probably pretty sure that never happened to my memory.
We've got our main event still to go. They get plenty of time too. 27 minutes and 43 seconds. Of course, we're talking about Team Smackdown versus Team Raw for the second year in a row. It's the main event. Team Smackdown here is Big Show, Rey Mysterio, Edge, Kofi Kingston, Jack Swagger, Tyler Rex, and Alberto Del Rio with, I guess, a mascot, Hornswoggle. Team Raw is Miz, CM Punk, John Morrison, Ezekiel Jackson, Santino Marella, R-Truth, and Sheamus. And believe it or not, Meltzer says he's shocked by the finish. I was genuinely surprised at the outcome because SmackDown has gotten the better of Raw in most of the angles and key outcomes building up to the match on TV. Hornswoggle was dressed up like a Viking since they're in Minnesota. Rex pins Marella with the first fall in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. The second fall is Sheamus over Kingston in 6:50. In the third fall, it's Morrison over Swagger in 13:05. Sheamus pins Rex in 14:29 after the brogue kick, and they're doing a little bit of a brawl outside. Show tries to run back to the ring. He's too far away. He gets counted out along with Sheamus at 15:26. R-Truth then misses an axe kick and Edge spears him and pins him at 16:40. And then immediately spears and pins Morrison at 17:07. Punk gets Edge up for the GTS, but Edge escapes and hits a DDT. Edge goes for the spear and misses, and then Del Rio tags in. So Punk and Del Rio trade moves until Punk pins him with a backslide at 18:02, but Del Rio's walking away smiling. And the announcers are telling the story that he didn't even care that he lost. And this appears to leave Miz and Jackson and Punk versus Edge. But as Del Rio's leaving, Mysterio comes back out and attacks Del Rio and rejoins the match. Of course, he had been thrown into the barricade earlier and it looked like he was done for. Mysterio pins Punk in 24:06 with a 619 and a splash from the apron over the top into the ring. And then there is a little bit of a mix up. Meltzer would write, Mysterio was then bounced around by Jackson. Jackson went for his finishing Uranagi. when Mysterio turned it into a DDT. Mysterio then hit the 619 and was supposed to do a springboard splash for the pin, but there was a big mix up as Mysterio slipped. Either Mysterio told Jackson or Jackson decided on his own, but the move was botched and they should continue. So Jackson kicked out, but the ref counted 3 anyway. Nobody knew how to react to this, but they decided that Jackson was eliminated at 26 minutes and 10 seconds. And that leaves Mysterio and Edge against Miz. Mysterio's going to go for the 619, but Alex Riley, who'd been at ringside the entire match, stops him. And that leads to a spot where Mysterio gives the 619 to both Miz and Riley. He goes for the springboard splash, but Miz gets his knees up. Miz goes for the pin and Mysterio kicks out. And then, believe it or not, Mysterio hot tags Edge. He spears and pins Miz, and that's all she wrote. 2.25 stars. Lots to unpack here. First of all, the botch. I watched it several times, and it does look like Ezekiel Jackson got his shoulder up after the 3 count, but very close to it. I mean, it might be like 3.1 seconds. So there is some confusion for the announcers. They're still probably trying to process the botched move from Ray, and that's going to happen if you're going to do all these high risk acrobatics. Eventually, you're not going to nail one. And that's what happened here. What should the protocol be when a guy's supposed to hit the planned finish, but for whatever reason, it doesn't look awesome? Is there a rule of thumb that when in doubt, do this?
No, but I would say if it, if it didn't look good, my God, Rey Mysterio and Big Zeke, that Ray had to look like a flea on the beach out there with Zeke, for God's sakes. It had to be something flush. Number one, I would have had Show knock Zeke out anyway to protect Zeke. I'm not sure Ray beating Zeke was where you wanted to go with him. My God, that guy had the biggest traps I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
Remember Zeke?
Oh, dude, he looks like one of those, the Mr. Olympia style builders with his monster traps.
Yes, pro bodybuilder, just unbelievable. And it looks superhuman. It was one of those deals. I think you're probably testing the bounds of my believability, even though Rey Mysterio figures out how to win. That one was a bit much. I don't know if I would have went there in that pairing, but the rule of thumb is if something screws up, wrestle on, take a couple of minutes and get back to something else and just do something else for the finish. Somebody got to think in there and somebody got to react. Ray would have probably been the guy to have done the thinking at that time. A lot more seasoned than Zeke was, but across the board to have, what'd you have, 7 or 8 pins in 20 minutes?
Yeah.
That's one long high spot.
Yeah.
And you never give the audience a chance to get into it, to get a guy really in trouble, to tell any storytelling, because that many eliminations, you could have probably actually had one fall. And if you were going to do a bunch of high spots, you could at least got a couple of sets of heat and shut that guy back down. And had a little bit more form to it. It feels like to me it was just one long high spot. And if that's the case, the audience never gets a chance to really digest what's going on. It's like, some matches go 20 minutes and you can't beat the other guy. Well, 8 guys got beat in 20 minutes. Feels a little log jammed to me.
There's a line in here, and listen, we fans have always believed that Raw was the A show, SmackDown was the B show. And we felt that way because we thought that's how it was slanted. And Lawler sort of removes all doubt with a line here. He says, if you become a big enough star on SmackDown, you can become a star on Raw someday, which to me was like, yeah, this is definitely what the company thinks. I mean, in your opinion, was there an A or B show? Do we have it wrong?
Well, I think the thing that a lot of the talent felt, because hell or high water, Monday night, Raw was going to be on USA Network, period. SmackDown got moved around and bumped around like the bastard child. It was like nobody really wanted SmackDown. And the talent took it personally, the SmackDown talent. I know for a fact, Finlay was one of the, their main producers, if not the main producer. And there was a division, when you had Undertaker on SmackDown and, some of those locker room leaders, there was a definite competition between Raw and SmackDown, and the SmackDown guys felt like they were the A show. They were just slighted on their programming and how they were bumped around, because every time you change networks and change times and change days, your audience has got to reset and go and find that. They're not necessarily up to speed on it. And if they flip the channel and it's not there, they move on to something else. They don't immediately start researching. So there were some problems with SmackDown and being on the different networks, but certainly the competition, each group of guys were very brand proud of their brand and pro brand, if that's the right terminology. But they were very competitive.
Let's talk about the next match. This is the actual main event, but since it's named Bragging Rights and it's Raw versus SmackDown, that kind of felt like the main event. But here's the background for Wade Barrett and Randy Orton for the world title, or the WWE Championship rather. At Hell in a Cell the prior month, Cena lost against Wade Barrett, meaning he had to join Nexus. To make it worse, the anonymous Raw GM forces him to obey Wade's orders or be fired. So in a battle royal on Raw, members of Nexus work to eliminate all the other superstars, leaving Cena and Barrett in the ring. Barrett orders Cena to eliminate himself, which makes Barrett the number one contender. So this is kind of a good story. John Cena's going to be in Wade Barrett's corner here. And after, Barrett tells Cena he would be fired if he didn't win the match, the fans start chanting "Fire Cena," which is kind of fun. It's a good story. 14 minutes, 36 seconds. Meltzer didn't love it. He gave it a star and 3/4. Here's the finish. He goes to set up the RKO. Cena jumps in the ring and gives Barrett the attitude adjustment. The ref then DQs Orton and rules Barrett the winner. And Meltzer says, this is only slightly less stupid than when Kurt Angle was bleeding and Eric Bischoff ruled the match a no contest instead of a Jeff Hardy win. Your own corner man attacks you, so you get to win the match. Even in convoluted wrestling logic, that makes no sense. Even less given the stipulations Barrett gave at the beginning. But it was sold like Cena outsmarted him by finding a loophole so Barrett would win, but not get the title. Star and 3/4. So the gist being, hey, if I lose, you're fired. So to make sure he doesn't, fall victim to this RKO and then lose his job, well, I'll just hit him with my finish and then he'll win by DQ. I kind of like it. I know Meltzer hated it, but I kind of thought it was smart. What'd you think?
Only way that works is you've really got to go in as the announcer and explain the layers of what I just saw. Did they cover it just like you covered it? That would be my question.
Right.
Because it is confusing without explanation. With explanation, it does make Cena, because now Randy's a rat-faced bastard too at this time, right? Randy's a heel.
Yeah.
So Cena's not beholding to Randy. Certainly, I'm sure they've already got a lot of water under the bridge. So Cena actually ends up screwing both guys. Correct?
Yeah.
But he fulfilled his obligations to Wade, because Wade still won by DQ. But you cheated the audience out of, seeing Randy do the RKO. So, if you dissect it, but, I've found when you got to stop and think about something too much to make sense of it,
that ain't good.
Sometimes it's not good. Sometimes when you sort through it and it was a complex deal, but once you get it explained to you, you go, okay, I get it. And maybe for the good of the program, that's what they needed on that particular night. Because this is a long running program.
It is. I am curious though, it's sometimes fun to armchair quarterback it. What do you think could have happened to Wade Barrett's career had he won the championship here and then been working for the title with Cena eventually? It's just fun to look back and think, because we all agree that they cut the legs out from under Nexus too soon. But what if we went all the way with it? What if he did win the title here and Cena helped him, and then eventually it became a 3-way, and then maybe it just went down to Cena versus Wade for the belt? That would have been a big time deal for Wade, but it didn't happen that way.
Well, again, Wade had it all. The reason they cut all those guys' water off, including him, who knows?
Right.
But he would have probably, had he had that big a win at that point in his career, it would have just put him at another level. And you would have continued to be building on it, and Wade would probably still be there.
Let's talk about the overall, your overall rating on the show. Fans of The Observer didn't exactly enjoy it. It got 60% thumbs down, only 17.2% thumbs up, 23.9% thumbs in the middle. The best match on the card, according to them, for the second pay-per-view in a row, is the opening match. This time it's Ziggler and Bryan. The worst match they thought was Layla and Natalya, followed very closely by Kane Undertaker. What'd you think of this show? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle?
Probably somewhere in the middle. You know, if it was just there to build the video game, and it was for bragging rights, which bragging rights, as we all know, which we talked about earlier, there's not a huge financial windfall, or there's not a championship surrounding it. It's just the fact that, hey, X number of guys from SmackDown beat X number of guys from Raw. And, that's what you get at the end of the day. That's the grand prize. So if it was to build the video game, it was probably just an infomercial for the video game, or at least something helping the video game get launched. Then it was successful. But as far as being one of those pay-per-views where you come out of it and the results of all those matches lead you to something bigger and better, I'm not sure that was the case.
Well, overall, I thought the pay-per-view was decent. I thought it told a nice story, but I do wonder, especially to your point, I'm ordering 2 of these pay-per-views in a 3 or 4 week period, 2 in the month of October here, and I'm getting a DQ in the main event. I don't know about that. I don't know that you'd fool me twice again the next month. I might say, I'll just see what happens the next day on Raw.
You need a finish in the last match.
Yes, you do. Well, that's going to bring us to a finish. We appreciate you guys tuning in for this week's Arn. We'll be back with you next week for another #Ask Arn Anything. We've got some great stuff. If you haven't already checked it out, please do over at adfreeshows.com. As a reminder, you get all these shows early and ad free, but one of the things we're doing is we're going to watch your Halloween Havoc 1996 match. This is your very last pay-per-view in the ring, right, Arn?
It is. That's when I discovered that I was missing a left hand.
We're going to watch that together over at adfreeshows.com. Please join us. We hope you enjoy talking about Arn's in-ring career as much as you enjoy talking about the behind the scenes of WWE. And if you've got a question for Arn, it's simple. You can get involved right now, just asking your question over at The Arn Show on Twitter. That's at The Arn Show. We'll be back with another Q&A. #Ask Arn Anything next week. Until next time, he is at The Arn Show. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you next week right here on Arn. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.